Welcome to the FML Podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sajdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML Podcast. Today we're joined by Oliver Mott, Head of Social Media at Starling Bank. Oliver, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Shamir.
For everyone listening today, could you just share a bit about yourself and your journey so far?
I'm currently at Starling. I'm heading up a social media team. Been there a couple of years now. I'm a new dad, and together with this rather amusing hound you can just see off my left shoulder, we live just outside of London. I've been out the M25 for the first time in my life. I'm just on the edge of the Kent countryside. But I was born and raised in London, in southwest London. My parents ran an independent ad agency out of a warehouse in Brentford, which was really exciting and fun place to be in the 90s, where I basically grew up. So I sort of grew up in this sort of smoky environment with a big print room downstairs. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. But my first career was in sports. I actually worked for the England Wales Cricket Board for 7 years. Being cricket mad, that was amazing. That was brilliant. Had a great time, met some great people. Facebook started for brands. I was there when we opened the first England cricket Facebook page and just saw how much it changed everything. And my idea of staying in cricket for the rest of my career quickly changed. And within a year or so, I was working in social media.
I've got so many questions around your parents running the ad agency and growing up in that environment. Before I jump into that, for anyone who's listening and perhaps been living under a rock, would you mind just giving us an intro to Starling Bank, who they are, what they do, and a little bit about them?
Yeah, so Starling Bank are a digital-only bank, app and web app, no branches, although we've got now 5 offices in the UK and Ireland, employ nearly 3,000 people. We've got a significant share of personal banking and business banking, SME banking markets, but have only been around 7 or 8 years. It was founded by Anne Bowden, who, read her book, check her out. She's an absolutely fantastic woman. Just recently stepped down as CEO, but retains is on the executive board. And she'd been a lifetime banker. And it just got sick and tired of how things just weren't set out for people. Banks were run for bankers. And so she went and set up her own bank, as you do, as a middle-aged woman from Swansea. Nobody said she'd do it, and she has. You know, we regularly win top awards as best banking app, best bank. We're the Which recommended provider, have been for 4 or 5 years. Yeah, and now we are just this enormous, challenger, yes, but established bank now. And it's a really exciting place to be.
I'm a huge fan of Starling Bank, and as many of our previous guests have been as well. One of the questions that we used to ask was, who from the fintech world would you like to take to lunch? And Anne's name used to come up very regularly. And I think kind of all of the reasons that you've just mentioned is are the reasons why. So kind of before we get into the growth and the marketing pieces around Starling, just want to sort of tap into kind of your role as head of social media. What does that cover? Are you looking after just the organic stuff, the paid side, or a bit of everything? It'd be great to hear more about that.
I run a small team, just 2 direct reports, social media managers, Lily and Arthur. Hi guys, shout out to the Porchetta crew. So we work across like a multitude of other teams. There's an in-house creative studio. There is the sort of digital growth team who do a lot of the paid SEO, PPC campaigns. And there's marketing, brand teams, and obviously product development and all the rest of it. And we sort of plug into all of those teams and doing what we do. We do quite a bit of paid work ourselves, but very much top of funnel. We're not direct acquisition, which is what our colleagues in digital growth really take care of mainly. But we sort of meet in the middle there. We've also got a huge team who work in our customer service team, who are customer service specialists who work on our social media inbound. So they're a huge part of what we do at Starling with social. We get a huge amount of inbound, as you can imagine. It has to be dealt with very delicately. a lot of it, and a lot of it is customer care, direct customer care. So we work with those teams as much as anybody else in making sure our customers are taken care of, but also we're jumping on some of the more interesting and fun conversations that can also happen on social. So it's very much like a matrix sort of way of working across all these teams. And it has to be. Everything moves so quickly at Starling. There's no other way of doing it. Everyone's really empowered to own projects and do things as quickly as possible.
I think that moving quickly just is really interesting because obviously internally as a growing brand, but also like the landscape of social media has been, it's quite rapidly changed over the last couple of years. I think, we kind of TikTok springing up and, acquiring share of Meta, Twitter suddenly not being called Twitter anymore. Threads kind of came and went in the last month.
They've gone, have they?
Yeah, well, are they like something like 20 or 25% of users now than they originally started?
Yeah, they need to do something with the product, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Mark Zuckerberg trying to take a piece out of Elon Musk, and if I'm honest, I don't think it worked out quite well for them. I think someone put on Twitter that the reason why they didn't sort of stay with Threads was the sort of content that they post on Twitter is not the sort of content that they would post on, say, Instagram, which is directly tied to. And so therefore it's a different type of user base that they've got there versus Twitter. So it kind of quite hasn't gelled.
Yeah. You've got their Twitter friends, you got your Instagram friends, and it's kind of it's different networks, isn't it? Really is. I think that's one of the big problems.
Yeah, you've been in social media for about 12 years now. What are the sort of key differences in how financial services companies approach social media, and then also some of the shifts that have occurred within financial services? It kind of be really good to kind of get your take of that.
First of all, just skepticism, trust issues, data issues initially. And I don't think that skepticism has ever really gone away, and not without reason. I think on a brand level, most businesses now understand what it takes to run social media, to have it in-house, and the resource and effort that's required to do it properly. That's been a really big shift. I've fought against that for 10 years and it's only just recently changing, I think, in brands. But, it wasn't ever that way. The first big shift was the outsourcing. These social media agencies just came out of nowhere. It was just farmed off, the whole thing. And I think that it was very much Wild West in those early days. It was exciting, and there were a lot of good agency parties because lots of people made good money really quickly. But the reality of it was pretty quickly worked out. My first job in social was at an agency. My second job in social was for one of the clients. I went from not working in social media at all to being on daily calls with Sir Nigel Wilson, Legal and General, with a client, and my first hire. And I was on daily calls with Sir Nigel Wilson, within 8 or 9 months. And it was amazing, that shift, as people understood the power of it, how seriously they had to take it, was massive. And I think I got very lucky to be hired by Legal and General and for a CEO as forward-thinking as Nigel. The second big shift was advertising, of course. That was where agencies jumped in from doing that, all the sort of organic creation and just growing numbers to running ad campaigns. And really that was where success was driven. But pretty quickly sort of worked out that for every pound you spent on actual advertising, there was margins and costs taken by agencies. And I think that you started to get a sense of the platforms themselves wanting all of that marketing spend, that ad spend. And that's when the platforms themselves became a bit easier to use. And you've got that outreach from Facebook back in the day and from LinkedIn and from Twitter, who wanted to engage directly with me and to get me using them directly. That was a really big shift. And it's where TikTok has been massively successful. They have been brilliant at engaging with brands. They've been fantastic. And Pinterest are also great. That's really where you're going to get success in future for the platforms. And, I think TikTok, they're obviously riding off. I think creators and influencers have always been around, right? And people have always bought from people, not brands. You're more likely to buy from a person than the brand, really, no matter what you're selling. But this enormous growth in the power of creators and influencers, and smaller as well, not just big names. It's been really, really interesting. And I feel like we're really lucky at Starling because we can use people who already know us, right? Who already use us. They bank with us. So when we use an agency for all of that, a fantastic agency for our creator outreach. And, they can go to a long list of creators and we will select all quite often because people say, I want to work with Starling. I use them. So we're very lucky, but this is going to change. The world of creators and influence is going to be really different in 2 or 3 years' time, I think.
Where do you think that's going to head, or what do you think? Where do you think that's going to end up?
Purely in financial promotions, I applaud the work that TikTok themselves have been doing with engaging with the FCA, and the FCA have been doing as well in working together. But and regulation, as Consumer Duty has done a great deal of good, I think it will have. But as regulation catches up with financial promotion, and Consumer Duty covers like an enormous, it's not just banks, it covers, it's a huge amount of different businesses. But as that regulation in all industries catches up with the realities of what happens on social, I think people will get driven out. Creativity does get quashed a little bit. And what it'll do is it'll ensure that the people who are really good survive, because it's legitimacy. You have to know what you're talking about, or you have to at least be able to talk clearly to your audience. And so only the best will survive that. So I think there'll be fewer. It'll probably shrink back down again, but there'll be a lot of people who are in the game now at the moment who won't in a couple of years' time, I think.
I think my view is that I think TikTok, there always were influencers on YouTube and Instagram, and I think the fashion industry really caught hold of Instagram. But I think kind of like TikTok kind of provided that like third leg to the stool, and that really got, there's this sort of influencer marketing, this creative stuff on the map. But one of the issues we run up against when we're speaking to we only do fintech and financial services, is the whole bit around compliance and getting influencer marketing off the ground for a brand. Because there's, a massive comfort gap that compliance doesn't have around the influencer space, and kind of getting them comfortable with that. And then the second part of that is that once you've kind of got the creative spun up, working with compliance through that process and getting them to understand that actually influencers aren't just going to put content out there that you don't sign off. Like, you can approve it first. And, that's kind of scares them off. But there's also issues around the type of influencers and the sort of content that they're putting out, and whether or not brands want to align with that sort of influencer as well. So, I think there's a big sort of credibility and trust piece, and then all of that kind of then blends into like the recent Consumer Duty stuff and, FinPro and all of those bits and pieces. You talk about your relationship with TikTok. We've spoken to them as well, and they're very, very proactive with working with brands. How have you tackled TikTok from, as a brand, from kind of Starling's perspective? What's been sort of the recipe that you're kind of following there? Because you've got quite a substantial following there at the moment. So I think that'd be really interesting to hear about.
It's a huge amount of work. You've got to be really organised for what ends up looking like you've done it on the fly and it's casual. I've never engaged in a project for any company in social where we've done more planning. There's been more background work than our current influencer marketing. We started off 3 or 4 months before we even really went agency shortlisting. We did a lot of work to understand what parts of the business it could plug into. We did a lot of work with internal stakeholders, like bringing people along, because particularly TikTok, it was that was the focus at the time. We had an influencer marketing agency that we used, but we knew we wanted to massively upscale. And so we did quite a lot of research even before we put that work out to a tender process. And what we found was by the time we'd done that and selected the agency, we'd done so much of thinking and so much of the work that actually everybody was along with us. Again, we're very lucky. I report up into Alex Freen, who I'm sure you know. She's CMO role now at Starling, sort of chief comms officer. Alex gets it. She understands that this is a place where our mission is to make change banking for better. And if you've got that proportion of people who are going to TikTok and not just one generation, but this is now multi-generation. You've got parents who don't understand money as well as they should. The people on TikTok. We had that understanding internally that this was a really important place for our customers to be and where they were learning about things. So we had to be there. And once we had realised that as a group, it was pretty easy. So I guess the lesson for anybody out there who's thinking about TikTok and thinking about how to make more of influencer and creator marketing, it's got to align with something core to your brand. Because if you're there just for having a laugh, then obviously you've got to do that a bit. But if that's if you don't have a really clear purpose, then you get lost. The content looks like that. You can tell the brands that haven't really done that bit of work refining the strategy first. And as long as you've got that and you can just keep that clear focus on doing one thing really well, then everything else fits into place. It's still a lot of work though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Influencer marketing, especially as you're kind of like heading up and looking after the more organic side, I imagine that it's really important to you in order for you to grow your organic followings. But also at the same time, it's super important for the work that or the content that's being produced as well to support your paid activity as well, especially on platforms like TikTok. I'd be keen to understand, that balance between, you talked about having content that's true to yourself, but then also having to like balance it with it being funny and amusing. And how do you maintain the creativity without it being watered down by compliance effectively?
Our internal approval process, we're all pretty tight. There isn't this like big evil compliance team who just crush everything. If anything, because particularly with TikTok, I mean, sometimes the context of the stuff is just so random that if you're in the office, you just hear people at one or other end of the office just laughing out loud, and you hear the trending sound, and you know who's working on your approvals for you. But because we've done a lot of the work behind the scenes to make sure what we're doing fits into a really, really simple framework, our approval system, it really benefits the process. It's the two sets of eyes. It helps us see around corners, because I think a lot of the time with what we're trying to communicate, particularly around fraud education, financial education and things like that, how some messages can be perceived when you're really close to the creation of it. Sometimes there are things you don't see, right? So a lot of the time, what people point out is really, really valuable. Consumer Duty has changed that. We've got our digital team who work really, really hard on making sure we understood what our approvals process was for Consumer Duty, and they did a fantastic job of that. At Starling, we were already trying to do everything that Consumer Duty has set out. So it's not really changed much of what we do. If anything, it's sort of created new ways that we can work content up. But how you retain that sort of fun and humour element when 12 sets of eyes see something, how do you limit that subjectivity to retain the clarity of an idea? It's really difficult. I think so far this year, we've probably had 2 or 3 social posts that were just like the original idea that have just gone out without just from this idea. But that's the reality of that's creativity. That's like how any show gets written. It's a table of writers working through the night and working on ideas, and you've got to I really like that process of interrogating an idea over and over again. You've got to work on it. It's not, I don't think humour comes straight off the cuff when it's like this, when it's scripted, when it's a scene or it's a character. And that's increasingly how you're doing the funnies on social. It's got to be a written piece, and that does take time. But yeah, it is quite rare that it's just a thing. Just somebody has an idea, we're like, bang, that's the post, out it goes. That just doesn't really happen.
I'm surprised it still happens in this day and age. Now, I think a few years back, I could understand it, where the social media accounts were kind of handed off to a junior or the intern. But even now, I do find that we'll be speaking to a brand around, doing some influence marketing activity for them, and we'll kind of say to them, well, we need to develop the strategy and go through that process with them, and they're almost like taken aback that there's a strategy behind it. It's not just us, or brands that they want to emulate. They're not just randomly going out there and going, stuffing some cash into a creator's pocket and going, hey, just do something funny holding our card. There's a lot more thinking around that. You mentioned, obviously done a lot of work on the strategy prior to actually, going out there, finding an agency and before you even started producing any content. I'd be really sort of interested that if you were to sort of go into another fintech, with kind of carte blanche, what would be your playbook? Knowing what you know now, how would you roll that out again and kind of what advice could you offer?
Having a really clear understanding of the problem you're trying to solve before you go and do anything is the most important thing. And then 2 or 3 different ways of doing that and having the ability to change and be quite fluid within that. So like the content that if you go back, our TikTok started about this time last year. If you go way back, we tried a bunch of things that, although are under the same like content pillars that we're running now, it's just very, very different ways of doing things. And I would still do that. I would still have that like test and learn approach. But as long as you've got to sit down and be like, right, what can we solve? What's the opportunity with TikTok or, YouTube Shorts or whatever it be? Get that right. Find 3 or 4 maybe different ways of expressing that and tackling that problem. And then what you don't necessarily need to do is go and find creators and influencers who operate within that space. I think where we've found the most creative ideas, the most creative content that's come back, and then the best results have been from surprising places. If you want to go and do financial education, don't just go and hire financial educators because, they know exactly what they're talking about there, but can they always be the best people to talk and communicate an idea, which is often quite a simple idea, to people in a way that is compelling? It's very often with what we're trying to do with financial education, we're just trying to get people talking about money. We don't need an expert in the actual financial products to create something that gets people thinking. Having some flexibility with who you use is really important, and testing that is really, really important.
One of the common questions that we constantly come up against is about demonstrating ROI, particularly around sort of the influencer piece. So I think from kind of your perspective as head of social media, how do you demonstrate ROI from both kind of like the influencer side and the organic side and demonstrate how that benefits the business in terms of reaching their overall goals?
That's the biggest question, isn't it? I see what we do is very much sort of top of funnel. I mean, the funnel is a bit of an old idea, but, if you think about the number of touch points that are required for somebody to change who they bank with, this is not something that somebody's just going to do from seeing one ad or a tweet or even a chat with a friend who already uses Starling. It's a multi-layered, longer-term decision-making process. And so picking where those people come from is incredibly difficult. But I think what we look at across all social is our share of voice versus other banks, our share of voice around topics and key areas that we feel are our territories, and not just the share of voice, but then the sort of how positive or negative those mentions are. So as long as we're in a space where there are people talking about the things that we want to talk about, are we getting a big share of that conversation? And is that conversation overwhelmingly positive or negative? And is at least a metric that tells us whether or not this is benefiting the brand? Are we in the chat? Are we seen in a positive light? Yes, that's adding huge benefit to the brand. The interesting things that have happened more recently with TikTok, but across social is with Consumer Duty is like, we're having to add links into comments of posts and things like that to make sure that if we are touching on certain subjects around finance, there is more information. Now, the amount of traffic going through those links has been eye-watering, and so that there is another metric there. There's another way of judging the interest in what we're talking about, and that audience's drive to go and find out more about Starling, about what we're talking about. It is there, and we wouldn't be there still with TikTok if that wasn't happening, and that has been happening there. Can we link that directly to fantastic customers coming on board. Very hard to do. We do try and do that. Obviously, there's a whole team of people who try to do that. But I think as long as we're part of a really good conversation where the brand wants to be, then that's a really good plus for us.
It's really interesting that you measure share of voice. I've spoken to a few head of social media managers, and none of them have actually mentioned that. And I wonder whether that's because they're keeping that under their hats or something that they're not measuring.
Well, we measure it for all banks. So I know which ones wouldn't mention it. But that comes with scale. Like, that's not just 'cause we're the best or whatever. Like, we're still a bit of a challenger. We're still a bit of we're starting to see that wane. Obviously, we're no longer the freshest face. We've been around. We have TV ads. We're an established brand now. So we have seen that wane. That just comes with size. It comes with a lot of things. Each month we look at these stats across all competitors, traditional and digital banks, and there's always something that's kicked off for one of the traditional banks that you can't get away from. Debanking recently has hurt us. It's hurt Monzo as well. They've been dragged into that. We haven't. Is that luck? Is that chance? Who knows? But as we get bigger, that will happen to us as well, increasingly.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point you mentioned around scale, because I think, challenger brands where I suppose share of voices, it just doesn't register effectively. I suppose at that point, you're going from more sort of quantitative stats to more qualitative information. So, what are people commenting and saying on your posts, and how much are they sharing? How much are they liking? And is it viable conversations that are happening across sort of social channels? I'd be interested just to talk very quickly just about Twitter at the moment, because Twitter, we sort of had a bit of a conversation about threads, but I think one of the biggest reasons around, threads sort of popping up was obviously Elon taking over Twitter. I said Elon like I know him. Elon Musk taking over Twitter, which is obviously now X. Where does kind of X now fit into your overall sort of social media strategy, and kind of where do you see it heading?
Currently, it's still almost half, but by far and away the largest platform for inbound customer service inquiries, right? It's still the go-to for people if they want to get in contact because they haven't somewhere else, or this is the first place they think to come, right? So as long as that's still the case, we'll be there. If there is another platform that starts up, and this is why we were so quick onto threads, anywhere our customers need us to be, we will be. We're a branchless digital bank. These are incredibly important routes in for our customers to get. So first of all, straight off the bat, it's dipped a little bit, but it's still where we get the most inbound. So we will stay there for that. Where is it going? I don't know. You read a lot about Tesla's share price and what that's going to do to his share of X and all the rest of it. It's so hard to say. But we need these platforms. Clearly, people want these platforms to communicate with brands. So they're an important part of the mix. So I don't wish bad on Twitter. Our team are still there. They're still doing a good job for us. They're still supporting us and what we're trying to do. So, I hope it survives, honestly.
I asked a question around sort of ROI in terms of the impact of the work that you're doing on organic and influencer. I suppose the other thing that I'd like to ask about is, I suppose, your role and your team's role plays in product development. A big advocate of speaking to customers and collecting information, data, and research. Where does kind of Starling sit in that? Is social media still important for you in terms of helping you develop the product roadmap? And then kind of what does that look like from the inside?
Yeah, it is. Probably not as much as it used to be early on when we had a community and like an actual, community area and all the rest of it. But it's still really important. We still have a lot of, I mentioned like the sort of phase we're in now where we're perhaps not, the underdog anymore, but we're still really lucky to have quite an engaged and loyal, committed community who know the product, who know the brand, and we get suggestions all the time, both from them and App Store and Trustpilot reviews, and we have an open Slack channel where these go. These don't just go into a black hole. These get filtered, organised. We have social listening plugged into this as well. Yeah, we're really lucky to still have a a community of, fans out there, and detractors as well. But loads of good ideas come through social still, so we are still listening. We still try to ask, what we found, one of the best things you can do with social as a brand like Starling is just keep people talking. And whether it's talking about the product or just generally just talking about money and our relationship with it, these are important things for us. But we let every product development idea that comes into us, we still report. We still report on that, both on a macro scale. We have social listening plugged in and it organises things and sends it to list. But also if there are things that we know the product team are thinking about, then there is an open Slack channel. So things, we can still say confidently, you asked, we listened, and we still try and do like that. And the business itself is still led by the product development. It's product first, not marketing. And I hope that continues.
As a customer of Starling Bank, I can see that. I put my request in for batch payments and they arrived. I've got to pay £7 for them, but they've arrived. So I'm happy. Still better than HSBC, mind you, who I banked with for a number of years, and they can do a name change. So shockingly so. Kind of looking into the future, what does social media look like for you and look like for Starling Bank? What's the mecca for you in terms of where you'd like to take, the social media channels and where would you like to get to?
What we don't want to lose completely is this brand love and interaction with our community that was a big feature of the early years. But as a brand grows, it can be just something that falls by the wayside as you look to IPO and you get massive and go mainstream. We want to retain that. A greater and greater amount of focus is going on, obviously, the customer care and customer services element, which has always been huge, but making sure we don't lose sight of what once made us great and what once gave us that brand love, engaging with people and not getting so big that we get scared to do that. And that can happen really, really quickly, I think, and you can just take your eye off it and suddenly you're not doing that and it's very hard to go back to it. So maintaining that, how we communicate with our customers as we scale is really, really important. Bringing the elements of how we communicate as well together, making sure that we're talking internally and making sure that there is consistency with that as our services grow and as our offering grows is so important. It's been a huge factor of how Anne came up with the ideas to start Starling even before it was a thing. And then in the early days of Starling, it was a huge, huge thing. And we have to, if we lose that, then we lose a really vital part of who Starling is and what it stands for. That segues into the second bit, where our greatest success so far with TikTok and our creative strategy, the thing I'm proudest of is that our biggest hits aren't Barbie dances and silliness. Some of those have done well, but our biggest hits have been videos of either our people or creators we've used talking about financial education, and psychology of money, how it makes us feel, fraud education, fraud content on TikTok. When we started off, we were like, we're going to have to talk about this eventually. This is why. And we're now doing that. And, we found a way to do it that is compelling and that people respond well to. So it's making sure that we keep getting people talking about money, which has been a great trend, I think, in the last year or two. We talk about money as a group more and more. And so those are the two really important things. And I think also but broadly speaking, I guess it's just making sure that people understand that we're still humans here at Starling. Being branchless, that can be tricky sometimes, but trying to make it feel as human and warm as possible. And that's what social can do.
Oliver, it's been absolute pleasure speaking to you. Before I let you go, I'm going to take you through our quick fire round. What podcasts are you listening to right now?
FML, obviously. I'm a new dad, so everything has just gone dads and parenting. It's bad, honestly. I used to love the Tailenders podcast. I was a radio man though. Before parenting hit, I was just a radio man. I was Today program, 6 Music, a bit of Radio Mer. That was it, yeah. But now it's parenting podcasts, and I listen to every single one.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah.
The unusual things I have Googled at 3 o'clock in the morning that no one warned me about. Thank God it's over. Other than Starling Bank, what's your favourite fintech brand or app or company?
We started sponsoring the Startup Awards this year, and I met the guys who won the Startup Fintech Award for the London finals. We're a group called Straight Pay. I see them pop up everywhere now. They do remittance services to Africa. Like, it's an enormous part of. It's such a huge growth area. It's somewhere there's no major player or hasn't been for a while. And I see them everywhere, and they're just going places. They were just a really great bunch. It was a real honour to meet that whole community. But they really stick out when people ask me that question.
What are you currently reading, or what book would you recommend?
The last great book I read was on holiday recently. I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which is a very old book. That was a beautiful read. That was the first time I read something which wasn't work-related, parenting-related, or allotment-related. I got an allotment in lockdown like everybody else, so I've been reading a lot of James Ribank's. He's a great author, all about farming and agriculture and what it's doing to the world.
What's the best bit of life advice you've ever received?
The second best answer somebody can hear is a quick no. I was told that recently, and it's come in handy a lot.
Very true. And last question, what's one thing that I haven't asked you that I perhaps should have asked you?
Well, I guess is a really interesting area that for all banks at the moment is debanking. And I'm glad we didn't cover it because it's a very difficult area. But it's a crucial area. And we could do a whole other podcast on what I've learned in 2 years working for a bank about what banks really are, what money really is, who owns it, and why it exists. You know, I'm glad we didn't get onto that. I'm not qualified to talk about it, really. It's such an interesting area. It's a shame that it's come into the public eye in the way it has done. But now it's here. I hope something good comes of it. There's been a communication issue with banking in this country for generations, which has led to people getting financial education on TikTok. It's led to banks like Starling starting, and it's led to people being debanked when they shouldn't, and people thinking that banks are a public service. And there has been a communication breakdown for generations, which has led us to a really bad place. And I hope that gets sorted out.
It's a whole other part. I'm definitely not qualified to talk about that.
No, but it's just the level of financial education in this country is really, really bad. And there are things I've learned about, in the 12 years of working professional financial services that people don't know. I thought was assumed knowledge, which just doesn't, like I say, there are generations now. We've done some amazing research at Starling. We have an ongoing campaign called Make Money Equal. And last year we looked into parenting and how parenting and children, how parents teach their children about money and how children learn about money. And we found shocking things about, there are now generations of parents who aren't confident enough to teach their kids about money. So that we've got and it perpetuates itself. And it's a really big problem. But that's what Starling was. It's why it's such a brilliant place to work, because we're genuinely trying to do something about that.
Amazing. I think that's a great place to end.
Long-winded.
No, it's absolutely fine. Oliver, great to have you on today. Thank you for your time.
Cheers.
The FML Podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.